Good afternoon. I take this privilege to set the scene for this whole session on the DPI dividend, where the practitioners and experts from across the world are going to probably discuss and deliberate upon the DPI issues, and their own personal relevant experiences, how they've implemented it or are implementing it. But I want to just start off by saying that in a world where Google has been replaced, you saw, by ChatGPT, the minister just alluded. Earlier, it used to be everything Googled. I Googled this and I found out. Nowadays, I ChatGPT'd this and found out. So how fast 3 years has transformed. And in a similar vein, DPI as a terminology probably didn't exist before India's G20 presidency. If it existed, it was in the academic world. It was in the world where we were still discussing and arguing what the definition should be. And now that we have one, I'm going to probably repeat it, which is that it is, and there are many ways to look at it. I was at the lunch session. There are people looking at DPIs, but the way we like to, as an academician, as a practitioner, define digital public infrastructure is open, interoperable, accessible, available to everybody, and that's very important. But also two commercial factors is non-rent seeking, and it says privacy by design. And these are layers of technology which are available to governments, society at large, and businesses. Now, everybody starts off by giving the DPI example as the road, the public road, the rails on which you have cars and businesses built or built around it. Similarly, the digital public infrastructure had been there for generations, for many, many ages. Actually, the internet, probably the TCP/IP was something that we saw being rolled out in front of us, and it did all of that. But the definition of DPIs really came to force, as I said, in 21-22, when the United Nations started debating the whole definition and what should be defined as a DPI and what should not be, because there are a lot of people claiming to be, a lot of platforms and projects claiming to be DPI, and they were not. So, in a brief, I have a presentation, but I'm going to only allude to a few points here. In India, specifically, championed DPIs at population scale, 1 billion people plus. The need was societal technology. The need was to solve for certain core issues of technology. And in 2014, when the current Prime Minister came into power, he put a lot of political equity behind building this now called DPI infrastructure in place. And I think it was to solve for the bottom of the pyramid. It was to solve for a societal challenge that other big tech platforms were not able to solve for. And that's why when you will hear about DPIs, you will hear about India's identity project, which was actually in place a little bit, but was not really working to transform society the way it was intended to. So number one, it is digital public infrastructure solves for society at large, but really bottom up. It solves for the bottom of the pyramid. And that's one of the key outcomes of implementing digital public infrastructure. And that's why inherently digital public infrastructure has a very key component to it, which many people miss out, is that it is driven by leadership. Many countries have given examples of digital public infrastructure, but India has championed it and implemented it at population scale. And I'll give you the amount of digital infrastructure we have built is huge, and we're building more because the political leadership has understood the benefit to the political economy and society at large. In fact, India's startup movement is built behind the digital, on top of the digital public infrastructure that India has. The most famous digital infrastructure that India built, the first one, was what is called India Stack, which has identity, the Aadhaar layer, the paperless, which is a DigiLocker layer, KYC layer, payments, which is UPI, which everybody talks about, and then the consent layer and the transactions layer that people talk about. Now, and you can see the amount of people on every, who are on the DPI ecosystem of India. But Mr. Koshi is here. He has been building the ONDC platform. There are others. We have now gone beyond that first few layers of DPI that we were building called India Stack. We built the Ayushman Bharat digital mission, which was CoWIN initially, the vaccine platform, which got transformed into a full health stack, you can call it, the digital travel stack, the voice stack, which somebody talked about during the lunch section, various other things, and many more things are in play. But give you a few examples. The minister talked about SDGs. One of the biggest SDGs that India has implemented or achieved is how DPIs were used to, as I said, transform society at large. 560 million people have opened a bank account, a zero balance bank account, which is not imaginable, using digital public infrastructure. And that, that is more than double the population of America in less than 5 years. That is the amount of impact digital public infrastructure has, by only achieving one thing, which is digital KYC. And when you have digital KYC, you break the friction and I'm sure the telecom folks here can tell you how expensive it is to do KYC, which is a regulatory environment, whether for telecom industry or whether for banking industry. And to just do a digital KYC, both from a policy perspective and a technology perspective, resulted in 560 million people coming into the financial ecosystem and having an access to a bank account. But the bigger thing that DPI did for the government, it started off why? And that is one of the core messages I will give. Any digital public infrastructure really first solves for the government, societal technology. India used to leak 85% of its benefits payments. So if you were making $100 billion worth of payments to citizens, only 15 billion were being used effectively. About 10 million ghosts, another 80 million duplicates and deceased people. Total about 100 million, which is sometimes the population of a country, more than that, were actually receiving fake benefits or duplicate benefits. By eliminating those and making a very transparent, entitlement-based process to reach this $100 billion to the right people into their bank accounts directly, has completely transformed society. Today, more than 320 schemes of the government are working on the benefits transfers happening using digital public infrastructure. I can go on and on, give examples. Nobody is going to debate the usefulness for societies, for governments, to use digital public infrastructure to solve for such problems. But what is very interesting is that in India, the digital public infrastructure is not being only used by, as I said, by governments, but also by the startups and the private sector. There's a big thing in the telecom world called the Jio moment. There's a telecom company called Jio, J-I-O, which started in 2016 and became one of the biggest telecom companies in India, which completely did e-KYC or digital KYC on using this stack, the India stack, and transformed the way telecom works in India. 100 million consumers in less than 140 days, faster adoption than Facebook at that point in time. So it is really transformative. That's why the core principle of digital public infrastructure, technology, but it has to be available and accessible to everybody in a non-rent-seeking manner. There is an infrastructure cost. Who bears it? Initially governments, because they get benefited themselves, but eventually it gets shared between all the users, and the overall impact on economy is very, very high. You will hear a lot about UPI, and very briefly, UPI has done something very remarkable. It has actually broken a biggest duopoly. India is the only country where payments are not dominated by two players, Visa and MasterCard, the world's biggest duopoly. And it actually did the third thing also, cash. In India, UPI disrupted Visa, MasterCard, and cash. And when the big demonetization happened in India, UPI was available to take that space. And today, actually 52% of the global transactions real-time transactions happen on UPI globally in India. And there are some other countries which have adopted it. You have heard about France, the SAARC region, and UAE and Singapore also doing the same. So what does DPI do? It gives a lot of dividend to startups, to society at large, to governments, and in general, you create a non-monopolistic, non-duopolistic platforms and systems in your country, which have a lot of implications on security and sovereignty also in the long run. And that is something that I think I will leave for the panel to discuss. We have, we have people who have done this and understood it and the impact of it. But I just leave it there, that it is not e-government. A lot of people confuse DPIs with e-government projects. It's not that. These are stacks, these are layers, these are open layers which everybody can use to transform themselves and their businesses and the government processes also. And it requires a lot of political equity, a lot of political will to implement, because you get a lot of pressure, not only from activists, the Indian experience will show you that, two, from incumbents, the ones that you're going to disrupt, and three, the political opposition, because they've understood that the benefits are reaching the citizens a lot more. And that's probably the reason that the Indian Prime Minister has been elected twice after winning the elections in 2014. So the benefits, when they reach people, the last mile, the general index of satisfaction in the government is much higher. So there's a lot of growing recognition amongst political parties, that opposition parties, that this is not good for them, good for the country. So the three sets of opposition always come, and that's why it requires a lot of political equity to implement. The reason I say that is many countries have shown interest in saying we want to implement DPIs, but the moment they face opposition from any one of those, the projects fail. So thank you with that, and I leave it to Erin to moderate the panel. Thank you.
I have to start by reflecting on my own experience over the last, 13 or 14 years of working in India, and going down to the shop and signing up for your phone with the piece of paper, and how long it took and how difficult it was. And you mentioned Geo there, and just how that's radically changed. Similarly with payments, going down to the Citibank and pulling out tens of thousands of rupees to pay for your suppliers along the way. Over those years, India has just fundamentally changed the way that it operates and the way it delivers services and the way that you pay for things. And it's just a really remarkable story. So thank you. And look, I am probably the biggest advocate for India's DPIs outside of India, and some of you on the panel, I've had the experience of talking about these sorts of things before. But in this panel, I'd really like to get into the experiences internationally, how DPI is being adopted, some of those stories around innovation and entrepreneurship, which I really do think is one of the fundamentally big differences that DPIs can make, and also hearing Indonesia's story and so on. So I'm going to do less talking, and we're going to jump straight into our questions with our panelists here. We have a really esteemed group of people and of experts to talk about DPIs. So I'm going to go over to the other end of the panel and start with you, Sikshit. You are from Nepal. You started Nepal's first ride-sharing app, if I'm correct, which is really interesting stuff. So what are those core features of DPI that helps innovation to thrive?
Yeah, thank you. Look, we started the first ride-hailing services on motorcycles in Kathmandu. So it's very similar to the Gojek. But the difference was that we didn't have so-called Ojeks. So giving and taking a ride on a motorcycle was not established behavior, right? So when we started, the first challenge we faced was, if there is no existing behavior, how would someone hail a ride with someone else? So there's no trust. Now, you needed to register all our drivers and all our consumers. And there was no way of signing in with Google because there would be a high API cost. So the first challenge we faced was we had to register every one of them through a manual process, including the driver license, including your citizenship, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, the customer could sign up themselves, so they could have proxies and create multiple accounts, right? First problem. The second problem, of course, was we didn't have digital payments, no QR payments, nothing like that. So we had to create our own wallet system inside, similar to a prepaid wallet of a SIM card or a mobile company. So, it gets me thinking as to if we had this stack, how quickly I would be able to innovate, right? So there is an importance on how these layers of digital public infrastructure would have propelled me to scale very quickly, which we couldn't do so. We did scale, but it was probably curtailed by these things. So digital public infrastructure for us was about building that trust, number one. And as we scaled, we hit the other roadblock, which was with the Google Maps, right? When you don't scale, the Google Maps would only cost you a few $100s, which you could afford. But once you scale, then there's a huge challenge because the cost of your map APIs would go to $14,000, $15,000 a month. Now, how do you sustain? Right? So it begs another requirement as to how the digital public infrastructure could go beyond the APIs of digital payments or digital identities and also have the local mapping system. Right? Because, look, in Silicon Valley, there is a nexus of some kind between, say, Uber and Google Maps and Google and Meta. So you can literally sign up with Google, and then you can literally have Uber use the Google Maps at a subsidized price. But that leverage is not there with us. And a large amount of our investments that come to the companies in the global south actually go back to Silicon Valley because you have to pay the price. Right? The third thing, of course, is about how we can thrive in this ecosystem. Look, if you have to fly on a plane, right, you need your real digital identity, you need your passport. But why is there a disparity when you have to take a train ride? Because you can book a train ride with an app like Omeo or Trip.com, which you have signed up with Google. But that is not your real identity because you can make multiple copies of Google accounts and you can have multiple accounts through which you can purchase a ticket. Why does it not require a legitimate digital identity to hail a ride on an Uber in India for a safety purpose? Now, if we can have a regulatory mandate where you can regulate to innovate, and I borrow this word from Dr. Anit Mukherjee, is you can actually mandate the startups to use your own layer of digital identities through which you can do each and every bit of sign up. And therefore, it creates a layer of safety, it creates a layer of trust, and also it creates a layer of efficiency and scale on the startups. So these are the three things that I can share through my experience.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a really tangible scene setter as well. I could sort of see myself trying to start that kind of business and those problems that you're coming up against without that foundational technology there. We'll get back to the regulation piece. I really want to talk about that later in our conversation, but we'll pick up on that trust and safety piece. It's really important. But Vikram, you've been on your own journey in Indonesia here, working Indosat, and you're sort of going from proprietary technology and you're going on this journey towards digital public infrastructure. So could you tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing and why you're doing that? Why are DPIs so attractive for you as a company?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to talk about Indonesia in the context of India. Let me, I was listening to my friend when he spoke about Aadhaar. My first 10 years of my career was in India, and last 7 years I have been spending time in Indonesia. I was posted in Northeast when Aadhaar was getting piloted in Tripura, and I was given the mandate. I never thought that something like this can positively impact billion of people, And I was in Delhi on 26 January with our ambassador. I saw it firsthand, how something which got started in Tripura is impacting billions of people. Yeah. So this is one point. I just want to build on what he said, how things like Aadhaar can impact lives of billions of people. Second, I think last 7 years being in Indonesia, the biggest learning I have seen that anything which benefit India can work here also, because the consumer profile from a telco landscape, if you look at ARPUs and all, very similar. We have to keep this in mind Because when you talk about Singapore, Malaysia, or US, these are very different profile. Here is a market where, the ARPUs are sub $3. So if you want to talk about benefiting people in the lower pyramid, you have to keep that in mind. But the key message I want to give is, and I picked it up firsthand when our president was there as chief guest for Republic Day on 26 January. He was very focused on one thing. He wants zero poverty in Indonesia. And he wants to use technology and things like DPI, which has worked in India. And he's very clear in his mind. If it has worked in India, why can't it not help people in Indonesia? What needs to be done? And this is where things like Aadhaar, UPI, was coming into play. So the point which I want to highlight is a lot of things which you saw on that full stack, which has worked in India, for sure it can work in Global South, whether it is Brazil, whether it is Indonesia, it can work. And I agree, it need that political will so that there are right policies, there are right private-public partnership. So this is, I wanted to set it up as a context. To answer your question, companies and countries who will not, and more so companies who don't move to open source from proprietary, will not be able to scale up. As a CEO of Indosat, I'm getting rid of everything which is at proprietary, even things like VMware and all. I don't want to name other brands, but you can't scale up. There is no way you can scale up if you don't move to open source. So for sure, we have started using it in our company itself, and we have started promoting it. You heard examples of Google ChatGPT. Even ChatGPT, gave me an offer. I said, my first ground rule is it has to be sovereign and it has to be good for Indonesia. Then only we scale up. So we have even made bold moves of promoting Sahabat Chat. See, those early days where you don't have the right to play, only certain brands from Silicon Valley can only do that, is gone. You don't need billions of dollars to build these open source. You need to have the right ambition and the right support. So we are a very strong supporter of open source. And a lot of things which we saw, we want to see how private-public partnership can help us scale that.
Yeah, that's really interesting observations. And what I want to do is sort of go back to the point around, you talk about scaling up and the need for DPIs to scale up and so on, but perhaps let's talk about investments into startups that are using that are using DPIs. And I'll go to you, Koshi, because you've been building this kind of technology. And I wondered if you had any observations. I think there's still work to be done empirically in this space to actually understand, have DPIs enabled more investment and then had better outcomes for investors based on the fact that if you have DPI, it's so much easier to build your product and you can scale so much faster. What have you seen over the last couple of decades that you've been in this space in terms of investments and what that means?
Thank you. It's a very important question because for any economic growth, you need investment and participation. If you look at, the whole physical market evolved like that. Multiple investment coming in, multiple technologies, multiple solutions, some succeeding and some failing. But when it came to digital economy, whether it is on the money side, where the money movement, or whether it is in the goods and services side, we saw walled gardens, a proprietary platform. Is there anything wrong in that? One fundamental problem is it limits innovation and investment to few companies, maximize the interest of their shareholders. If I just give a very, very cynical way, it is like the East India companies of the olden times, where it was trying to dominate for the interest of their shareholders and their promoters. And that's what's happening even in today. If you look at the digital commerce world, where every developed country or developing country, in every domain, whether it is consumer goods, whether it is in ride-hailing, whether it is in travel, everywhere, there are only 2 or 3 companies, a duopoly or monopoly, which means that investments are invested, small companies fail. That is why when we have an open channel like this, it encourages significant amount of possibility of startups to come. In fact, both on the money side, which is what he explained, UPI, and open network of digital commerce, which is in the area of commerce, both in goods and services. We are seeing hundreds of new companies coming up with solutions. Some are very regional, small one to help the small mom and pop shop to digitize and come on board, or some to help the farmer producer organizations to get a national market, or third to get the artisans to get exposed to an international market. All of them are experimenting because you don't need the billions of dollars either for brand building or for the technology, because they're trying to straddle the whole commerce. Whereas here, you would have heard Arvind explaining, it is unbundling and interoperability. Unbundling means if I'm good at making it, I only make it. Logistics is a service which is available on the network.
Yeah.
Warehousing is a service available on the network. Payment is a service available on network. Because of the openness of the protocol, I'm able to stitch together. So a smart young startup coming from an engineering school can say that I'm going to create a solution for my regional people, helping them to buy everything that is relevant from across the world, because I don't need to go and tie up because those building blocks are there. So that's why I believe that the idea of open network is the one that drives innovation and investment at global scale or at the regional scale and still be successful.
Yeah, thanks very much for those remarks, Koshi. So in terms of where the investment is coming from, though, so do you have any observation, like who's funding DPIs?
Okay, so let me just quickly give you, there are if I look at three kinds of funding coming. One is to get the basic infrastructure. We found that it's like collective investment of the larger banks and financial institutions came together to set up a central entity, the ONDC or NPCI, which is UPI.
Yeah.
Okay. Then is a large number of entrepreneurs and VCs are coming and finding a lot of operations. In the e-commerce world for the VCs, I mean, their approach is, there may be one or two fellows saying, I may become a trillionaire. Whereas here, there are multiple billion-dollar companies coming. So that means there is an encouragement, a lot of coming from the VCs. And the third is very important, is that's also encouraging investment from the government and philanthropic capital and even CSR, because that is how they believe that they can do affirmative action for the small business to actually take into account. So we are seeing the investment from all the sectors, and which is a possibility, which is an open network enables.
Yeah. So we've got investment happening. We've got, this is a great idea. We've got, this just makes it so much easier for me to build my business, which is super exciting. But then what is the role of regulation in all of this, and particularly for all of the policy wonks in the room here today? So Mallory, what kind of regulation makes DPI more effective? And what does DPI need from a regulatory standpoint? What are your observations there?
Thanks so much for the question, and to the panelists and to ORF for the invitation. So I have been an open source free software activist for a couple of decades now. So it's really exciting to come back to this moment and see that we get a redo. I do think that there is a connection between the e-government and digitalization and where we are now. It's okay. Sometimes we need to rebrand things to give it another go. So I wanted to use that that period of digitalization and kind of what went wrong from my perspective and see if that can give us some lessons learned. And I think one of the core pieces in all of these is going to be regulation. So the first thing that went wrong with the sort of first version of digitalization 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, was it was sold as an austerity measure, that digitalization would make things cheaper and easier. And I think we have to confront, especially with the use of AI, we have to confront these externalized costs, that it is actually quite expensive, and it's still worth doing, though, and I'll get to that in a second. The second one that kind of failed with the first version of digitalization was we were building technology, what we thought would be a one-size-fits-all strategy for everyone, and that isn't going to work. It hasn't worked. And I think it's better, what I see is one of the innovations now of DPI is that we're going down to basics, bare bone protocol development rather than apps that can be duplicated. So that's another thing I think we're doing better. And then the last one was that really digitalization was an exercise in privatization. Governments were handing over responsibility to big companies. They didn't want to deal with regulation, so they sort of asked the tech companies to deal with it. That privatization has, I think, largely failed, and the lesson learned there is that the free market is not going to solve a lot of these problems. Like, free market approach to DPI is not going to end up where we want it to. So again, like I think we want to as well bring in something. So I've listed some of the issues here, right? Tech is expensive. The localization of data centers is quite expensive. There's a lot of laws now on the books where if you're going to run a service, you need to run it in country. That's data centers in your backyard. That's electricity, that's water, everything that comes with it, climate change. There are risks to privacy. There are risks to human rights. I think the activists that have been raising alarm bells for a long time need to be brought into trust relationships. And so I think what I would suggest is, and this has actually happened, I think that DPI comes at a time where we have created some common sense regulations. Before India started adopting DPI measures, they also passed a comprehensive privacy regulation. There's the GDPR in Europe. There is, so data protection underpinned and created the environment where this could happen. I think that regulation needs to come with any kind of DPI, so a government needs to be ready to implement it across not just privacy lines, but other kinds of lines. And I think also we need to imagine that I think that there's a lot of reasons why DPI can replace some of the silos people have pointed out, which come with big tech, which is that we now have things like interoperability and openness. Yes, you have these data structures, you have portability and you have agility, but you have longevity, right? Governments actually need these data troves for much longer periods of time, whereas in sort of capitalist, profit-driven big tech, everything is temporary and short-term. And the very final piece that I think is super duper important is the governance mechanism behind this. So folks will be familiar with Beacon protocol because that's what's underpinning a lot of this. That protocol isn't frozen in amber. It's actually its own standards body as well, fashioned after the Internet Engineering Task Force, which I've worked in for many years. It sees itself as a standards body that will continue to grow and extend this protocol in the long term. And that governance mechanism can be global. It should sort of help us entangle, once again, across jurisdictions as global projects for DPI. And those are the kinds of things that I think are universal and that we should really focus on. And it's a sort of form of regulation, but it's a bit beyond that, right? It's more durable. It's actually a long-term governance commitment.
Yeah, and look, Mallory, they're all really interesting points. Something that I've picked up on that you've just been talking about is the cost of technology and how many people in the room get those notifications on their bank account where you've subscribed to something that you forgot about and, all of a sudden you've got all this money coming out of your bank account that you didn't expect and whatever. So for the consumer, it's also very expensive. But the reason I say that is because when you look at other regions in terms of capitalist markets. So this is a little bit academic, but please indulge me for a second. When you look at post-Soviet states, there's this idea of rentier capitalism, that everything is rented by people and there's no real private ownership. And I feel like today in the West in particular, the technology is going in that direction. Our lives are being rented month on month, whether it's Uber One, whether it's, whatever this subscription is. You can't own the technology anymore. You can't buy the software and you have it on a disk and you put it on your computer. You rent it in the cloud. And I think that that's a really, interesting thing to look at and really problematic going forward where all of your money goes to these things. So that's another thing we could potentially talk about, but excuse me for going off script for a moment. But I've seen a couple of hands go up over here. So maybe we'll start with you, Vikram, then go to Koshi on this regulation piece.
No, I just want to build on what she said. I'm facing this every day, every week. For all these things, it needs trust. And trust comes from right privacy data protection policy. I'm sure everyone in this room will know what is technological imperialism or digital colonization. I think these are real fear. 2021, I was in Silicon Valley. Some of the senior leader told me, Vikram, data sovereignty, it doesn't make sense, the cost will go up, data center. I think the point which we need to understand, and first supporting all the point which you made, the right trust is only built through when you have the right policy to protect the data of every citizen. That is a must do. Also, I just want to call out one thing. It is not only about what is data sovereignty. It is not only about data center being in the country. It is also about investing on human talent. It has to be controlled by the people in the country. It cannot follow a China regulation or a US regulation or any other country. If it is in Indonesia, then there are talent who need to know how to manage. So there is a misconception that if the data center is built within the country, it is sovereign. So I just want to bring the importance of investing on human talent so that they have the control. Every country, people, talent who belongs to that country, they have the control of doing it. And the last piece is the example of QRIS. Indonesia has done it. If you are solving real problem, interoperability is at play. Today, if you go anywhere in Indonesia, you put the QRIS, which has been done here. It is open source, interoperable. Same kind of thing on the whole data, DPI, what you call it. We need to start solving real problems. And that has to benefit people in the lowest pyramid.
Yeah, which is a very localized mission, right? Sikshit, I think you've got your hand up. Then we'll go to you, Koshi, just on one particular thing that you said that you mentioned as well about money going back to Silicon Valley as well. And it's this, I suppose these ideas are slightly separate, but also slightly intertwined, and digital colonialism, I think that you called it. Can you, I don't know if you want to jump onto that piece of the conversation, because you're obviously very conscious of, well, you might get investment here, we might develop technology here, but actually the money is just circling right back to the United States.
No, I think I'll take it up from a different perspective. Look, Richard Feynman has famously said that I don't create something that I don't understand. I don't think the regulators or policymakers understand the technologists, or the other way around. Because look, you try to cancel a ride on Uber, how easy or how difficult it is. It's extremely difficult to find that cancel button, right?
Yeah.
Because the default setup of an app is based on the ideology that you should not find the cancel button, because by the time you cancel, the rider would already be on its way and you have to pay the cancellation fee, right? That's the default through which these apps are built. So it's built in design. Now, and that's how a lot of money is going back to these big tech companies. So I think when we talk about regulation, we should not just speak about regulation from creating frameworks and then thinking that the technologists would adopt it, right? For example, in US in the 90s, they tried to increase the organ donations. So their form had, if you want to donate your organ, please check the button, right? But it only translated into 25%. But when they kept it as a default that if you don't want to donate, then you check the box, it went up to 75%. So by default, all the technology that we have is set up in a way that it benefits these companies, right? That's how regulation is formed within technology. And I think there should be a way in digital public infrastructure, you should be able to create these frameworks and regulations. If you can create regulations around how the buildings are built, how the roads are built, how the public physical infrastructure are built, why can't we frame regulations on how the UI and UX of an app is built, right?
Yeah.
So this is one thing. The second thing is...
But just before you go on, Sikshit, but also at the same time, you're an entrepreneur, right? So doesn't that fundamentally go against what you're trying to do in terms of making money? So you want it to be a feature of the system that it's hard to cancel.
Of course.
So you don't want the regulators to come in and say, must be a cancel.
Because now we are at an age where it is not me, it's the artificial intelligence that's going to do that. And if we feed these biases are going to go against the public and it's going to go for these big companies, right? The second thing, of course, is that the way the regulations are built in the West, we have the GDPR, which gives the onus on the companies to retain and then delete the data after some time. It's just like a traffic sign in the Western countries where everyone is believed that they would not jaywalk or not move past the solid lines. But if you look at our countries, we don't have that, and we jaywalk and we cross the double solid line, right? So what we have in these countries is we have the real physical dividers, and it is technically and physically impossible to cross these things. So we can create these kind of guardrails through consent-based mechanisms in digital public infrastructure. So if you're sharing a data for just one time, you're already making a technology-based regulation in a way that you cannot jump over the line, right? So by default, number one, we need to create the defaults that serves the public. Number two, technology and regulation as a technology is something that we need to build so that tomorrow, when we get into the age of AI, we would have placed the right kind of guardrails in the technology, in the DPI itself, so that it does not go above and beyond what we intend.
It's not tomorrow, is it? We're already there. And I think that's part of what we're really, struggling with everywhere around the world right now. But I have been the worst moderator in the world, and I have not left enough time for questions. So I'm going to, Koshi, stop you from saying your comments, and we'll go to the floor and perhaps scoop up one set of questions for our great panelists here, and we'll hopefully get some answers for you before our time runs out and I get looks from over in the corner. So are there any questions from the audience?
My question is maybe a naive question, but it is to Mr. Vikram Sinha. You mentioned Sahabat AI. Now, if I put a query in ChatGPT, who is Mr. Vikram Sinha, and I put the same in Sahabat, the answers would be very different. My question is this. So you're talking of, AI sovereignty. Does it mean that if you have your own AI vehicle, you will be able to generate answers which are more culturally attuned to Indonesia, or there would be considerable overlap?
Thank you, Excellency. This is a very good question. Second time I have been asked this question. So look, the foundation model doesn't have to change. You don't have to invest billions of dollars on creating. This is the beauty of open source. See, this goes back to, proprietary versus open source. So when you are on open source, we can use each other model to train our data. So that is why you don't have to invest on foundation model. There are foundation model from Gemma, Llama, DeepSeek, and whoever is open source, we can build on top of it. So what countries, and this has been a debate I've been hearing in India also, whether countries have the right to do this or not. We very strongly believe, yes, the country has the right. And the reason why I'm telling you, that is the only way. See, nobody is building on Bhasa, Javanese, Sundanese, and understanding the linguistics. So what we are doing, we are capturing voice log, and there are a lot of data. So Sahabat is not about Indosat or GoTo. It is about all the 5 universities, the media company. They are not comfortable giving some of the data to any other company if it is not following the data sovereignty. So those things are getting trained. Eventually what happens, he gave an example which is commercial. People are designing. But think of it, if you don't do this today, after 10 years, 15 years, you will only be fed what other want to feed you. You will not be fed anything else. So you can't allow the heritage and culture to be in the hands of others. So you have to start doing it. It is a small start, Excellency, and I'm getting a lot of support from the entire ecosystem in Indonesia to go in that direction. But eventually, what will happen is, the answer will be more or less correct on Vikram Sinha, for sure. But more so when you talk about Balinese or Javanese or Kalimantan dialect, you will get better answer here when you do a comparison. So we are very focused on Bahasa and Indonesia. So that is where we are doing a lot of things on top of the foundation model, and we are using all the open source foundation model.
Quickly, I just want to comment on what Mallory was talking about, the regulation and what he was talking, and to bring a final nuance to it. If you really look at one of the challenges in the developed countries, is that they, like somebody pointed out, they're just left to the big tech to just monopolize practically every segment. So then it is, but the thing is, if you're trying to control it by regulation, it's not easy thing, especially when it comes to developing countries, it's even painful. Take the example of US. They had been trying to bring in some discipline through America Innovation and Choice Online Act, creating an act and getting it passed through the whole thing for the past 5 years. It has still not completed the process. And these kind of demands can become even more worse in a developing country. Does it mean that? So that's why we have to have a nice balance of technology with enabling policies. Like he was explaining, for example, you can't control, the biggest challenge why Uber is able to do what he's able to do, because that's practically a monopoly. We were able to break that with an open network. Like if you come to Uber cannot stand the chance of that kind of thing in India, because we have now Namaya 3 and the open network, which has completely changed the world. So what is needed is that the mandate of building the digital continent, digital economy should be on the basis of the digital public infrastructure, which means that has pointed out many of the rules of this continent should be digitally enforceable. So it becomes a part of that. Instead of trying to create the regulation and then hope that the market will build up, the market should be built up with appropriate rules already factored as a part of the network rules and protocols. And that's one of the components of the digital public infrastructure, that enforcement become a part of the protocol, not a separate regulation.
Yeah, thanks, Koshi. Mallory, you've got the final word.
It's a real privilege. Again, I'll just actually use the opportunity to quote from folks who made the Beacon Protocol. The principle is, you are building something that works at scale rather than scaling what works. And I think that's a real opportunity that governments have that no other sector has. I've been saying this for ages as an actor in standards bodies, particularly. Governments like to come to global standards bodies like the ITU or the IEEE and so on and throw their weight around as sort of pseudo-regulators. But what I've always wanted to see is governments coming to these global standards bodies that are designing technology from the ground up as the creators of the technology, because you have the largest populations of people. You could, you effectively have everyone using that technology. You could be bigger than Google, right? If you just sort of did that. And I think that's the political will that's been coupled with the technology being available that hopefully is coupled with regulation. So it's like this trifecta. I think it's regulation, it's standardization, right? And then it's implementation. And maybe that's a company, maybe it's a nonprofit like a Wikipedia or Mastodon or other things, or maybe it is a government. So I really look forward to seeing governments show up more to standards bodies where folks are effectively governing the way the internet works, the way AI works, the way emerging technologies work, because I think it's been a missing piece for a long time. So thanks.
Perfect. I think that's a really great way to end the session, Mallory. Thanks so much. And thank you to our really esteemed panel. That was a really great chat. And, thanks for being here. And thank you to ORF for having us as well. Thank you.